Welcome to OncoLife interview session. It's my pleasure to introduce our guest today, Dr. Dajun Yang, CEO of Ascentage Pharma. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Really my pleasure to join.
In this session, we will explore innovative clinical research behind the third generation tyrosine kinase inhibitor developed to overcome resistance in chronic myeloid leukemia. Could we start with some information about your professional journey and background?
Thank you. It's my great pleasure. So I'm co-founder, chairman, CEO of Ascentage Pharma. We started Ascentage Pharma about 15 years ago, 2009. And at that time, we had a program in US and China. And this particular drug, olverembatinib, started research about 2013 in China. And before that, I was a professor at the University of Michigan in US and started my previous company, Ascentage Therapeutics, about 20 years ago. But for today's drug, olverembatinib, is designed to be the third generation BCR-ABL inhibitor, particularly to address the specific gatekeeper mutation, T315I. That's the major distinguish between second generation and the third generation BCR-ABL inhibitor. So since we started the preclinical work more than 10 years ago, this drug was able to enter the clinical study about 9 years ago, 2016, after IND review approved by CDE in China. So 2016, we had a first patient enrolled from the very beginning starting at 1 milligram, and then escalate to the current approval dose at 40 milligram. But this drug really demonstrate very robust efficacy and an overall safety profile initially in Chinese populations. So about 2020-21, this drug was approved in a conditional approval in China for patient AP or CP patient with T315 mutation after we complete the registration trial. So this was the first and the only third generation BCR-ABL inhibitor approved in China for commercialization. But we also conducted clinical trials in the US. Initially, we called the phase 1B or 2A. Basically, it's a bridging study with Dr. Contagion and Jabu from US MD Anderson Cancer Center. You probably know that's the leading leukemia department in US. So they conducted the US patient with CML and also some Ph positive AL patient with the drug, and also demonstrate great efficacy and the safety profile. And this result was published on JAMA Oncology last November. And also we had an oral presentation at ASH based on both the US and the China data. And actually the Chinese, since the phase 1 study in 2016, we have been making oral presentation at ASH every year for the last 7 consecutive years. So this drug is truly demonstrate probably the best third generation BCR-ABL kinase inhibitor globally.
Could you explain how the third generation tyrosine kinase inhibitors work and the science behind them? What makes olverembatinib particularly effective in targeting the resistant mutation in chronic myeloid leukemia?
So, more than 10 years ago, when we started to design the compound targeting the BCR-ABL inhibitor, that time there's no third generation inhibitor on the market yet. But, since Gleevec, the first generation imatinib, approved to treat the CML more than 20 years ago, the mutation arising from BCR-ABL inhibitor become a problem after, using the drug for a while. So then there is this second generation BCR-ABL inhibitor like dasatinib, nilotinib. But one unique difference for BCR-ABL kinase is that the mutation can arise in multiple spots, right? And not just one or two hotspots. Really spare all the kinase domain BCR-ABL gene. But more importantly, the one distinguishes all the first, second generation inhibitor is this what we call now gatekeeper mutation. That's a T315I. And so that time, all the first or second generation kinase inhibitor will not have efficacy against that particular mutation. That's number one. And the number two is, unlike other kinase proteins, the BCR-ABL can also have multiple mutations in one single gene. That's called the compound mutation. Okay, so that means that in the single cell, they can have more than one mutations. And one of the most difficult to treat compound mutation is T315I plus other mutations. Okay, so about probably now more than 10 years ago, ponatinib was the first one derived initially by Ariel, and then acquired by Takeda, has been the only third generation BCR-ABL inhibitor globally, except in China and a few other countries. But ponatinib have one limitation because of the initial safety event, like a cardiovascular event. So the ponatinib carry the black box warning from the FDA. And of course, they titrate the dose still, or has, before our drug approved in China, was the only third generation BCR-ABL kinase inhibitor globally. But there is some safety concern with the black box warning. So we designed this drug to be specifically address that mutation, number one. Number two, we selected preclinically, tested multiple mutations, single mutations, compound mutations, and demonstrate this particular drug. Initially, we call the HQP 1351. And then, of course, the official name is olverembatinib, is the most efficacious. Okay. So throughout the rigorous preclinical testing, pharmacology, PK, and toxicity, and then we selected this drug enter the clinical trial. The very first patient started the clinical trial was October 2016, started at 1 milligram. So since then, we tested, all really, phase 1, phase 2, multiple dose and everything, and then become eventually, after 5 years clinical work in China, with a conditional approval initially with a T315 mutation only, CP or AP patients. Of course, after that, almost the same time, I believe 2 years before the approval, we conducted a full clinical trial. Okay, and in China, the patient who failed all 3 TKIs, meaning the imatinib, dasatinib, and nilotinib, are eligible to enter our registration trial. That's a pivotal phase 2 trial. So after all the study, we got an initial approval, and then we conduct the full clinical trial, meaning including patients without T315 mutation. Okay, so we conduct that trial and got a positive result. So by 2023, the China CDE also gave us a full approval for those patients who failed 2 TKI and all intolerant, and then they can be with the T315 mutation or without. So that's really increased the patient population in China. And also good news is that all 3 labels entered the NRDL, the National Reimbursement Program, by the China Healthcare Security Administration.
Olverembatinib has already received clinical approval in China for CML with the T315E mutation. EHA 2025, several studies highlighted in use of the combination therapies for Philadelphia chromosome-positive acute lymphoblastic leukemia. What do these early findings reveal about its efficacy and safety in frontline chemotherapy-free regimes?
As you know, besides the CML, one of another indication, the disease in the clinic is Ph positive ALL patients, right? But the mutation of the fusion of BCR-ABL in the ALL is slightly different than the CML. So the CML is, we call it P210, P210, 210, where in the Ph positive ALL, majority are P190, okay? So, besides the third generation BCR-ABL inhibitor to the CML, initially including the imatinib, has been also used to treat the Ph positive ALL patients because of similar BCR-ABL fusion protein, right? Even though the kinase is slightly different. But those early BCR-ABL inhibitor were also effective against Ph positive ALL patients. So since the olverembatinib was approved in China for the CML about more than 3 years ago now, 2021, the doctors in China actually have found out the olverembatinib also very effective and safe to treat the Ph positive ALL patients. Okay, in the clinic, in the real world, the first generation imatinib actually is less potent. Okay, even though initially 20 years ago was also used for the Ph positive ALL, but later they found actually imatinib is not that effective. Okay, as a first generation, and then in the real world, dasatinib is widely used to treat the Ph positive ALL patients, but the dasatinib also has some safety issues. Okay, so I think the first thing we really see the result of efficacy and safety for treating the Ph positive ALL patients actually come from the real world. Okay, so the physician actually found out the drug is really effective. The patient with a Ph positive ALL patient can see CMR, the complete molecular response, in as short as 2 weeks. Okay, so that's a really robust efficacy. In only 2 weeks' time, you achieve CMR. Okay, that's the number one. If you look in the 3 months CMR rate, majority of our trial can achieve 70 or even 80%. Okay, so that's really the data coming from the real world, right? Because our drug hasn't finished an official trial for the Ph positive ALL yet, but in the real world, physicians do prescribe the drug for the Ph positive ALL patients and see really robust efficacy and also safety. Okay, so since then there's a lot of investigator-initiated trials, and they have done many studies to find out really good data. They publish it on scientific journal or the hematology meetings like EHA you mentioned, like ASH in the US. So most of these are actually investigator-initiated trial, and they do different kind of combination. And one is like you mentioned in the chemo-free regimen, where they combine, the Blincyto, okay, which is also kind of widely used to treating the Ph positive ALL patients in some cases. But basically, when you combine the chemo-free regimen like Blincyto, actually the data is even more robust. Our 3 months CMR rate can like 100%. 2 months is like already 80-90%. So that's great news for Ph positive ALL patients because this chemo-free regimen have a much better safety. And actually, we have data now in that regimen. Patient can use the drug for like over 2 years. Basically, after initial reduction, and then in the maintenance therapy, they can continue use. For some cases, they may actually don't need the transplantation. So I think the overall goal in the long run for Ph positive ALL patients will be the first chemo-free, right? And then if they can tolerate well, continue efficacy, they can do with or without transplantation. If it can keep a good efficacy without transplantation, then the long-term goal for treating the Ph positive ALL patients will be the chemo-free and transplant-free.
One of the most striking findings was from the combination study of the olverembatinib with the blinatumab, where the 100% of the patient achieve complete remission after the one cycle. Could you explain the clinical significance of these results, especially in terms of the long-term survival and the tolerability?
So in the clinical practice, chemo is still kind of widely used because Ph positive AL in general AL patients comes with very severe disease, right? So you do need some chemo to combine with, okay? But the data we have from the real world and the investigator-initiated study in combination with blinatumab actually is chemo-free and a very good efficacy. We can have CMR, complete molecular response, in as short as 2 weeks, the first time measurement. And in 3 months, as you mentioned, we can achieve 100% CMR rate. So I think that the benefit to the patient is really the first, this is chemo-free and well tolerated. And more importantly, we do have now clinical data to show patient actually beyond the 3 months, some of them with the transplantation or some without the transplantation, they can use this regimen for like more than 2 years. Okay, so this is really bring the tremendous benefit to the Ph positive AL patients in terms of chemo-free and transplant-free.
Another promising study combined olverembatinib with bandazine and prednisone in the newly diagnosed Philadelphia chromosome positive ALL, with a high response rate seen in just 3 cycles. How could this approach change first-line treatment for adult patients?
Yeah, that's actually our current registration trial called the Polaris-1. Okay, so we had a lot of clinical data with that we call the low intensity chemo. That's the VP regimen. So in the low intensity chemo, then you have a much less, AEs, right? So combination of olverembatinib with a VP, the low intensity regimen, has demonstrated great efficacy and also safety profile. Okay, so based on that data, we got approval from the China CDE last year for the registration trial, phase 3 registration trial. Okay, so that's if we get approval, that would be great because this is the first line newly diagnosed Ph positive AL patients with a low intensity chemo regimen because clinically low intensity chemo regimen have a much less AE, better safety, right? And then combined with olverembatinib also can achieve a great efficacy. Okay, so we're actually also in discussion with US FDA and also European EMA to seek the approval for this Ph positive global phase 3 registration trial. We call the Polaris-1. So I think if this Polaris-1 eventually got approved for conducting global phase 3 registration trial, and then hopefully we can have this regimen protocol approved based on the clinical data, and then that will benefit the Ph positive AL patients globally because this is the first line treatment and also demonstrate great safety and efficacy data. And hopefully, if the phase 3 registration trial outcome successfully carried out, we can commercialize this treatment regimen for the patients globally.
In relapsed or minimal residual disease positive Philadelphia chromosome positive ALL, this combination of the olverembatinib enabled to 64% of the patient to proceed to allogeneic stem cell therapies, transplantations. Could this represent a game-changing bridge therapy for the transplant-eligible patients?
I think that's also very encouraging data. So that combination and then allow patient to proceed with allogeneic stem cell transplantation. That again will dramatically improve the efficacy, and then without probably the chemo that will have a long-term benefit to the patients. And I think that's also a really encouraging data, and will have a long-term benefit to the Ph positive ALL patients.
Ascentage is conducting a global phase 3 trial Polaris-2 for olverembatinib. Could you share some insight into this design and objective of this trial, and what timeline we might expect for top-line data regulatorily filing outside China?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have this global phase 3 registration trial for the olverembatinib versus bosutinib as a control arm. This is a global phase 3 registration trial cleared by FDA last year, and we'll call this Polaris-2. So this is the first time we have the FDA cleared a global phase 3 registration trial with the olverembatinib. So based on the previous data, olverembatinib have demonstrated very robust efficacy, even in the patients after they failed ponatinib or asciminib, or in few cases, the patient who failed both ponatinib and asciminib. Okay, and these are all the U.S. data from the leading PI at MD Anderson. Okay, and so combined with the U.S. data and the China data, FDA agreed this Polaris-2 registration trial protocol. So basically, there's two arms. One arm is randomized with a bosutinib 2-to-1 ratio, and looking for the 6 months MMR rate after the last patient enrolled. And there's also the arm B, which in the patient with a T315 mutation, because the control arm bosutinib is not effective against that mutation, right? So the FDA allow us to enroll single agent, single arm with 48 patients. Okay, so both we are conducting both the arm registration trial globally right now. We have to get a clearance from more than 20 countries. I think the size is growing. It's probably 60 or 70 sites globally conducting this trial. So hopefully, if everything goes smoothly, we could finish this Polaris-2 registration trial either by the year end or early next year. Okay, so with 6 months MMR rate, we probably can have NDA application to FDA second half of next year.
Beyond the CML and Ph positive ALL, one study explored olverembatinib in patients with FHFR1 rearranged myeloid lymphoid neoplasm. What is the rationale behind targeting this rare subset, and what early findings support its broader potential?
We actually had the poster presentation at EHA. So olverembatinib actually is a multi-kinase inhibitor. So in addition to inhibit the BCR-ABL and multiple mutations, it's also potent inhibitor of a c-KIT and also FGFR. Okay, so because we know this kinase inhibition profile based on the preclinical kinase assay and the cell-based assay, so the PI in the clinic actually found out this drug could have a potential activity with the FGFR rearranged myeloid or lymphoid neoplasm patients. Okay, so basically, the first based on the kinase profile, olverembatinib is actually multi-kinase inhibitor with potent activity against these FGFR rearranged tumors. And then they conducted a clinical study and actually looked very promising. Of course, this particular subgroup of patients are not very common. So the PI actually, in this particular case, found out very effective, and will continue to enroll that group patient. And hopefully, we may have additional indications approved based on the further clinical study.
Thank you very much for joining us. It was a pleasure to have you today.
Thank you for the opportunity.